Welcome to Act 3 of Deconstructing Directing, Directing with Kindness. I'm Andrew Robler, the founder and archivist here. Whether you're a current or future director, whether this is your first exposure to deconstructing directing, or you've already explored some of our content, I am so excited that you're here. Today, in Scene 4, we're going to talk about auditions and casting, which are a very challenging part of our directorial work, and some tips on navigating them with kindness. First, if you haven't had a chance to engage with Act 2, Scene 7, Taking Care of Ourselves, I highly recommend you check that out. It has some great tips on clear steps we can take to help ourselves manage stress, because for many of us, auditions and casting are one of the most stressful parts of the process, second only to Tech Week. Additionally, a few things we'll discuss will reference content found in Act 4, Scene 1, Directing with Kindness. Okay, business out of the way. Let's dive into these casting conundrums. As always, let's start by getting specific and breaking down what exactly we mean when we talk about casting and auditions. Casting is, at its simplest, the act of choosing people to play particular roles in a production. Of course, it's rarely at its simplest. At its most complex, we are evaluating skills, dealing with complicated schedules and conflicts, paying attention to who is represented in the cast, considering potential and encouraging growth, identifying visual preferences and textual requirements, e.g., Hermia really needs to be shorter than Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and in the back of our heads, concern about how the overall audition is running and possibly a dash of imposter syndrome. Auditions are the most common means of casting, and there are several variations, ranging from monologues and cold reads, meaning they don't see the text until they audition, to warm reads, when the text is given in advance, dance calls, and vocal auditions. Monologues, vocal auditions, and/or dance auditions are often used when there is a large number of people auditioning to help narrow down the pool. These auditions allow us to get a sense of the skill level and range of the person auditioning, but, with the exception of dance auditions, are usually not an opportunity to see someone in a role from the show. When there are a more reasonable number of auditioners, many upstream spaces will jump straight to having actors read from the script in either cold or warm reads, while others will save those for callbacks. Callbacks are a way of reducing the number of people invited to another round of auditions so that we can spend more time working with those we are actually considering casting. In downstream spaces like Broadway, it's not unusual for there to be multiple rounds of callbacks, but in upstream spaces, it's often not feasible to hold more than one. Throughout the audition process, there are a lot of assumptions that pervade the process, many of which are based solely on, quote, the way things have always been done. We're going to spend a lot more time talking about auditions in a later act, but suffice it to say that one of the most powerful things that we can do as directors is to stop and really think about A, what information we need about an actor in order to know if we should cast them, and B, what information we gain from any given audition structure. Auditions are essentially a job interview, and like any interview, the tasks we set and the questions we ask will determine what we learn. There's an old saying that casting is 90% of directing, and while I would challenge the percentage, it is true that, similar to cooking, excellent ingredients can significantly elevate the final product, even if the cooking is mediocre. And just like any job interview, it's also a chance for an actor to learn about us and what it will be like working with us. When auditions are poorly organized, it tells the auditioner that their needs have not been considered, and it can be hard to trust that the rehearsal process will be any better. When directing from a place of kindness, considering the needs of our auditioners is kind of the bare minimum. We'll explore the audition process and alternative structures in a later act, but this gives us a good foundation on which to discuss our casting conundrums. In this scene, we're going to explore 3 that seem to be the most common, but if there are others you'd like us to cover, feel free to use any of the feedback forms on our website and let us know. First, let's talk about what it means to cast the quote-unquote best actor for the role. Again, let's get specific about what we mean. Best is a superlative that sits atop a chain of other objectives like good and great, and importantly, their meanings are all subjective, at least in part. Ask 10 people who the best actor in the world is, and you'll likely get 10 different answers. Of course, we can't choose from all of the actors in the world, so we usually limit the idea of the best actor for the role to mean the best actor for the role from among those who auditioned. This may seem like an obvious thing, but it's important to recognize that we're already putting qualifiers on the idea of what best means, because the reality is that we often make implicit qualifiers on this idea of choosing the best actor for the role without realizing it. For example, let's say that I'm casting Sweeney Todd, and I have narrowed my options for casting the title role down to 3 men. The first one, we'll call him Jose, has the strongest vocal ability and is the most pleasing to the ear while singing, but is not the strongest actor. The second one, we'll call him Darrell, is an excellent actor with a solid singing voice, though not nearly as strong as Jose's, and he's also much shorter than the other 2 guys at 5'3". The third, Steven, is visually a strong fit with dark hair and eyes and a foreboding presence. He's a strong actor, though not as strong as Darrell, and a strong vocalist, though not as strong as Jose. But he also has a reputation for being a jerk to other people in rehearsal. Who's the best actor for the role? The reality is that there isn't one right answer. Each actor has things to offer and drawbacks to their casting, and who is the best for the role will depend heavily on the priorities of that particular director and production team that are casting them, which makes sense. Again, this may feel very straightforward conceptually. The reason that this becomes a conundrum is that cast the best actor for the role is often given as advice or justification for casting choices as though it has an objective meaning. I see it all the time in online groups where directors ask for advice about how to handle difficult choices like our Sweeney Todd example above. I've heard it used in conversations about directing and casting with my colleagues and peers, and I've even had directors state that they always cast the best actor for the role when speaking to us at auditions or callbacks. But as we've just explored, that phrase has little to no inherent meaning because there are so many dimensions to casting. In our Sweeney example, there are at least 4 dimensions of bestness we are confronted with: acting ability, singing ability, visual appearance, and kindness, or lack thereof, in the workplace. We might even have more dimensions to consider, like rehearsal conflicts, potential and opportunities for growth, union status, and more. We could create a casting matrix like many companies do when hiring to try and remove some of the subjectivity from the process. But even assigning a score to each dimension requires a subjective decision about who deserves a 3 versus a 5 in a particular area. So how does breaking down this idea of the best actor for the role help us to direct with kindness? Because now that we know better, we can do better. First, we can stop using the phrase the best actor for the role as though it has any inherent meaning. The best of anything is completely contextual and often subjective. Instead, what if we talk about casting like a puzzle? In some versions of the puzzle, certain pieces will fit one way, but in others they might fit another. It's not about finding the superlative actor for one particular role, but instead about finding the best combination of actors for all the roles in the show. For example, when we hold callbacks, we can let everyone know up front that we called them back because they could absolutely play the role, but that each of them brings a different quality to it. Callbacks are our chance to figure out which qualities for the role fit best into the overall cast for this version of the show we are directing. We can remind them that it's not a question of ability. If they were called back, then they are effective actors, and not being cast or not being cast in the role they most want isn't a judgment about their ability, but simply about the overall puzzle. Being specific about the purpose of callbacks helps to reassure nervous actors and gives them all a clearer understanding of what you're asking for them to do in callbacks, which improves the information we're going to be able to gather in that callback. Second, we can learn to be much more specific about what we are looking for when we create and post audition calls. Since reckless kindness is a core artistic value for me, I value kindness in those that I work with, so I will make that clear in the audition call or during the audition process. We could be specific in naming the things that matter to us as individual directors. When directing musicals, for example, I would like actors to be able to sing effectively, but I am always going to prioritize a more effective actor who sings decently well over an incredible vocalist who isn't the strongest actor. And there are directors for whom the opposite is true. I also care much less about visual appearance than a lot of directors. In fact, I love casting against type whenever I can, and we'll explore that more in a later act. When we can get more specific for ourselves about the things that matter to us, we can then communicate those to the actors, which enable them to focus their attention in the areas that matter to us. Remember, auditions are a job interview. Imagine a job posting that just had a sentence-long description of what the job was. How would you prepare for that interview? And consider these 2 audition postings. Posting 1. Sweeney Todd, 40s to 60s, the demon barber of Fleet Street. Dark, brooding, and back in London to exact revenge. A bass. Prepare 32 bars of a song not from the show and be prepared to read from the script. That's a pretty typical audition call, right? It communicates some really basic information, but that's about it. Compare that to this. Posting 2. Sweeney Todd. The character has a dark energy that is driven by a desire for revenge, but looking for a take on the role that is different from what we typically think of. Open to considering actors who can convincingly play a man in his 50s. Please note that our company prioritizes kindness, so attitude and treatment of others will be considered along with acting and singing ability. It's still not a super lengthy role description, but already an actor has a much clearer understanding of how to prepare for the audition and what to expect in how we are looking to cast the role. That's not only kind to the actors, but it's kind to ourselves as directors, because now we are going to get much more information about an actor's approach to the role as it aligns with our initial vision than we might with a more traditional casting call. In the usual spot down below, we've put together a worksheet to help you think through your initial vision as it pertains to casting a show, and offers a template for creating a casting call that prioritizes kindness in this way. The second conundrum we're going to explore is what happens when the actors that you need don't show up. This might mean that you're casting a show with a particular demographic requirements and you don't have enough or any actors from that demographic at auditions. Or it might mean that you didn't have enough actors show up, period. It's the first instance that we're going to focus on most because it's one that many directors in upstream spaces might struggle with. We most often hear about these situations as they pertain to racially specific storytelling contexts, like an all-white cast of shows like Hairspray, The King and I, or West Side Story. But this doesn't just happen with race. It can also happen with age, gender, and disability, among other characteristics. Sometimes we can immediately see the problem with casting a person in a role specifically written for a particular demographic of actor, but many times I have been a part of complex discussions on the subject, and where does one draw the line then is often asked. For a long time, I saw the line limited by race. If a character was specifically written for one race, to cast an actor of another race was the line. This seemed clear and unambiguous to me at the time. Then I had the privilege of getting to see The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime when it was running on Broadway, and subsequently read a lot of what I now consider to be very important blog posts and perspectives from autistic and neurodivergent artists critiquing the casting of an allistic or non-autistic actor in the role, regardless of the use of autistic advisors in the process. Of course, the autistic community is not a monolith, and there were and are autistic folks who didn't see a problem with it and still don't, but it sent me down a rabbit hole asking where the line was. As producers and directors, the last thing we want to do is hurt others with our work. The idea that I could be perpetuating harm against people who are already marginalized was deeply concerning to me, and I spent months wrestling with this, talking to fellow artists of all different experiences and trying to understand where the line was. Here's the conclusion I came to, which drives a lot of my choices to this day. The fundamental truth of acting is that we are not the people we portray. We share a basic humanity that, when combined with our imagination, allows us to try and put ourselves in the place of another to understand what drives them. This can be a powerful experience both for the actor and the audience because no identity is a monolith, and nuance is important. It's also important to recognize that those with marginalized identities that are named in a script are those with less power in our society, including our industry. Simultaneously, the fundamental truth of the field of acting is that there are people whose identities limit their participation in roles that are not specifically written for them. People who use wheelchairs are almost never cast in roles that aren't specifically written for people who use wheelchairs. People of color are starting to be cast more in roles that are not specifically written for people of color, but it's often tokenism and still the minority of roles that are offered to people of color. They are far more often only cast in roles written for someone of their racial identity. Autistic folks who aren't as adept at masking their autism are very rarely cast in roles that don't specifically mention autism. Trans and non-binary folks are similarly often cast only in roles where those roles are specifically written for them. The flip side of this is that those with slimmer, white, and non-disabled bodies are often seen as universal bodies, which can play any role whatsoever. In fact, it wasn't that long ago that it was seen acceptable for white actors to play literally any race, especially in film and TV. In Act 2, Scene 6, we talked about 6 types of power, one of which is referent power. Referent power is a description of when we use personal connections or similarities to influence others. This is the type of power that exists due to race and class, among others. This, then, is the crux of the issue. When people of a particular identity or lived experience are only or mostly given the opportunity to participate in theater as an actor with that lived experience in roles that are written for them, the line exists. When we direct with kindness, we want to uplift those opportunities for the actors who share those identities because I recognize both truths listed above, not just the first. It's why I'm not as worried about only casting people who have experienced depression to play characters who are experiencing depression, because actors who have experienced depression are not generally deprived of other roles because of that part of their identity. There is, of course, still nuance that is needed in this framework. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. The reality is that legally speaking, we aren't allowed to require actors to disclose parts of their identity. We can be clear in the casting call of the limitations, but it would be illegal for us to ask someone in an audition about their religion, for instance. This makes it easier in some ways to draw the line at visible differences like race, ethnicity, behavior, etc. And it's still crucial to understand that cultural and identity are not costumes. But the overall perspective that I offer here is that instead of seeing it as a forced limitation, as though people are trying to make our lives harder as directors and producers, we instead see it as a way to widen the tent that is theater. People whose identities are on the margins bring expertise and perspective that is often overlooked, and choosing to include and uplift them and their experience enriches everyone involved. There's no perfect answer, and it's likely that plenty of folks will find fault with this framework, but I offer it as a starting point for self-reflection for us as directors, especially those of us who hold power because of our default identities, whether that's whiteness, cisness, allisticness, the lack of disability, etc. We have an opportunity to be part of a change in this field, but it starts with recognizing the very real truths about our industry and choosing to no longer be part of perpetuating that harm. On the practical side of things, when we don't have enough people at an audition to effectively cast the show, we essentially have 4 options which need to be discussed with the producer or producing organization if we are not also the producer. First, we can hold another round of auditions specifically for those roles and make efforts to promote the opportunity among the community from whom we are looking for actors. Second, we can reach out and make asks to actors we or the producing organization knows, specifically inviting them to come, read, or be cast in the show. Third, we can choose to change the show that is being produced. This can be challenging if pre-production work has already begun prior to auditions, but it's often preferable to the fourth option, which is to cancel the show entirely. Another complicating factor can arise when you have enough people at an audition numerically to cast the show, but you do not feel that anyone at the audition can effectively play a certain role. Directing with kindness means that we must be transparent with those who have taken the time to prepare for and attend the audition. Imagine applying for a job, getting an interview, and then never hearing anything, but a week later you see the same job posting get reposted. How would you feel about the person hiring for that role? Now, this type of thing is very common in theater, but that doesn't make it kind behavior on the part of a director or a producer. We don't need to go into detail about why we haven't found the right fit, but simply letting them know and thanking them for taking the time and effort goes a long way to maintaining a positive relationship with actors in our community. Similarly, pre-casting one or more roles is a perfectly legitimate choice. To be specific, pre-casting in this context means offering someone a role before general auditions are held. Now, there are many reasons that a show might precast one or more roles, and precasting itself is not a problematic or unkind behavior. In fact, in some situations, it can be the most prudent decision a director or producer can make. In upstream contexts, however, where there is an expectation that opportunities be made available to more folks to throw their hat in the ring, precasting major roles regularly can send a message that to get major roles, you have to be part of a select group. This mismatched expectation can easily lead to resentment. Similarly, not publicly stating that a role has been precast and thus encouraging others to get their hopes up about being considered for the part can lead to resentment as well. While we do not need to justify our casting decisions to the general public, but should always be able to explain them to stakeholders like a producer or our assistant director, clear communication about whether a role is precast is a crucial step in casting with kindness. One of the ways that I choose to live out reckless kindness is through this work, which is truly and completely 100% free to you and will always be as long as I can help it. That said, if you find it helpful and are able to support it financially, please consider joining our Patreon, which will allow you to set up a small monthly donation and earn fun perks like stickers, monthly hangouts, and Q&A sessions with me, and more for helping to support this project financially. But again, none of this content will ever live behind a paywall, so if you can't or don't want to join the Patreon, don't worry, you'll still get all of Deconstructing Directing completely free. I'll see you again when you're ready to dive into the rest of Act 3. Until then, I challenge us all to be recklessly kind.